So what I want to talk about is the kind of the complete picture of what the jobs are like in information security. Because there's a lot of choices you can make, and some people are predisposed to go one way or another, and some people have, a pretty good idea. They want to stay technical, or they want to maybe start a company or something like that. Well, there's ways to focus what you do so that you end up popping out the way you want. Let's talk about jobs. All right, here are all the pieces of information. This is not all the pieces. I mean, I could rattle off some of these, probably pretty well and come up with 12 or 13 of these. And you might recognize a lot of these, right? Governance, how we make the rules, how we make group decisions on things. You want to change a standard, you don't just do it. You can't do it anymore. You have to get a lot of people giving you the head nod before we do something like this. So understanding governance, extremely important if you want to be in a role where you are managing information security. Policy, I think everybody knows what policy is. How you use policy is something that you need to learn. Using policy is how you get enforcement done. I got to have a piece of paper that says, here's the rule, and once the ink is dry on there, I can enforce that policy, right? If the rule says you cannot gamble at work, as soon as the ink is dry on that, and I had to get an acceptable use policy through 3 labor unions, which was no easy task. And but once that happens, we're able to go out and buy some technology to make those rules enforced. So now you can't go to a gambling site, and you can't go to adult sites, and you can't do peer-to-peer file sharing. That's how you underpin your job with policy. That's a quick example. Organizational personnel security, okay, background checks, okay, I am living proof that the background checks of the city of Seattle do not work. All right, physical security, everybody knows, got to have doors, fences. When you do the CISSP certification, and some of you will do that, they're going to ask you questions on the exam. How high does the fence need to be? How many lumens does the flashlight need to have? Blah, 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 blah. So you need to know a little bit about that. Access control. Everybody knows access control. That can be firewall rules. That can be a password policy. That could be a lot of things, depending on whether it's network-based, right? I'm sure you're all doing it. Risk management. Risk management tells me what I can safely ignore, what I can deprioritize. When you do your little calculation, threat probability and impact, and you come up with this kind of list that's scaled to risk, and you find out, wow, these 2 systems here have identical vulnerabilities, but I'm going to concentrate on the HR system because impact would be high there. Cafeteria menu system, not so much. All right. Technology oversight is really important, especially because the world is changing very, very quickly. Right? Our paradigm here has been web browser, go to any website you want, and now it's a single function mobile app on your own device, throwing stuff over to Dropbox, right? What used to be a well-defined perimeter is now this big fuzzy probability ball of where's my stuff. And so technology oversight, when somebody is developing an application or buying something, you need to go and sit down at the table and talk about what your standards are, what you expect of vendors, et cetera, et cetera. Compliance, that's what auditors do. Just making sure that the rules are followed, making sure that there's a piece of paper that they can have that says, yeah, you're following this rule. Monitoring and incident response go together. At the city, we monitor every packet that goes in and out of that network. And that's the way that we put stuff together. Your preventive controls are going to fail. They're gonna fail. Bad guys are gonna get in. How bad they are, may depend, maybe nothing. Maybe fake antivirus, ha ha ha, flatten the computer, get going on. It may be something that's trying to steal intellectual property when it's not so ha ha anymore. But when the stuff gets in, the thing it can't hide are the network communications when it goes and talks to its command and control to bring down more stuff, a keylogger, a data sniffer, or whatever. So monitoring and then having a real good process there to get that responded to and get that cleaned up as quickly as possible, because the residence time of that malware on a compromised desktop is extremely important. You want to shorten that as much as you can. If the person whose computer is compromised writes that cafeteria menu, we don't care. If that person does wire transfers for the organization for payroll, then we're going to do a forensic investigation on that disk to find out if we lost something very important. Legal, our jobs in this rapidly changing world are going to turn into a whole lot of legal and contract stuff, right? Because it's going to be a whole lot of vendors. We're going to put stuff in the cloud. We don't need a data center. We're going to use virtualized desktops in the cloud. We don't need desktop computers. What relevance does a phone have anyway? A phone on your desk? Really? Wow, what an antique. So as we are changing, we're going to be pushing more and more stuff out of the cloud. We have to worry about legal and contract issues. Crypto, a lot of you guys are headed to NSA. So what you have seen are the big buckets, the moving parts. You see how they're tied to the standards of practice. You see how the regulatory requirements are there, and they all go back to those kind of same buckets, right? So I would think that your curriculum probably has a whole lot to do with studying those particular facets of information security. So what do you do when you learn this stuff? What happens when you go to work? Has anybody considered what their job is going to be like? Right? Where you're going, when you're going to pop out at the end of this thing, right? Some of you may want to go to more school. I wouldn't. I can tell you, I went to 14 years of school and it was way too much. Way. But, you know, I mean, you think you're going to pop out of this thing and you're going to get a job. What are you going to do? What's your job going to be? Are you predisposed to technical stuff? You want to be a forensic analyst, go to work for Mandiant, something like that? You know, you want to work in law enforcement, work for the FBI as a forensic analyst? That's pretty good stuff. You want to be an analyst and work for Amazon and work like 9,000 hours a week? You know, doing whatever it is they do to burn people up? You might, I don't know. So, a practitioner, right? When I do the jobs thing at Agora, right, I always split it up: practitioner, auditor, executive, all of that stuff. And when we look for the jobs around the area, so practitioner, here's a few roles for a practitioner, right? Operator analyst, mostly the network people run things like firewalls, right? That's just commoditized access control. But intrusion prevention, intrusion detection, stuff like URL filtering and content protection, these things are still kind of within the domain of information security. So you may be operating stuff like that. We take interns from community colleges and we put them on all that stuff and give them exposure to that. And they see how a FireEye alert turns into incident response and cleanup and then possibly a forensic examination, right? You may be that forensic investigator, and more of this is going on, especially now that the legal people have discovered all the money they can make off e-discovery and wanting you to go find every electronic document that has anything to do with the case they're working on. So even in the legal profession, there's a need for information security professionals. An engineer and an architect. So an engineer builds out what it is we need to keep our enforcement going. The architect designs all that. Now, if you are working as an engineer or an architect, you are probably working for a big corporation because they do these things very slowly and they use very well qualified people to do these things. You know, government, probably not so much. If you're in the government, you're going to hire a consultant to do it. Incident responder, these are getting to be very important as well, especially now that, you know, there's a lot of hype, there's a lot of FUD around this cyber war stuff, but sooner or later, something real is going to happen. And we take our measurements at the city, we see real stuff trying to happen all the time. And it's not very sophisticated, a lot of that stuff. Some of it starts to work. I mean, we've had individuals at the energy utility in Seattle targeted. The people that do negotiate trades of energy over the electric grid have been. No, man, no, they're targeting. Here, you're a power marketer. Here's something just for you. Here's a fake intelligence brief. Click here. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, it turns out, and maybe I'll tell the story some other time, but when China hacked Google, we were collateral damage in that. Why? Because Google produces power. They have power marketers. One thing that got stolen from Google, the list of contacts of the power marketers, right? The FBI confirmed it. He's going, well, we can't really confirm that. Okay, an auditor. Nobody wants to be an auditor, really. They make a lot of money and they wear shiny shoes, but nobody likes them, and it's never a happy thing when they show up. But I mean, still, it's another role, right? I mean, somebody's got to do that compliance, right? These are the Ernst & Young guys, the Deloitte people. A bit, yeah. Somebody who's necessary, but you don't really ever want to see them focus on you. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, security project manager. When you're working in a big organization, you don't just throw down a piece of technology. There's all kinds of process you need to wrap around that. You have to train people. You have to make sure that the support is in place. Somebody's got to run that project. Project managers generally are contract employees. They make gobs of money by being very controlling, making sure things stay on time, on budget, everything gets done, thinking of it, doing all the documentation. Application security. Okay, so we're going to mobile apps. So who is it that tests mobile apps to make sure that they're okay? And how do we certify that it's okay to put that application on your organization-owned device? That doesn't really exist yet. In fact, this is a good opportunity for startups here. So if you were to find a startup like AppAuthority, a buddy of mine named Tony Bettini, who also came from Gardent, he was the guy that won the Innovation Sandbox at the RSA last year. Companies like that, if you were interested in being in the startup space, because what happens is acquisition and then boatloads of money, maybe you want to get into that space. Right now, application security specialist is kind of limited to the old paradigm where we do penetration testing against websites, right? The OWASP top 10, right? SQL injection, cross-site scripting. Are you vulnerable to any of this stuff? No? Okay, go ahead, show it to the internet. Okay, consultant. Most of what consultants do is some variant of penetration testing. And you might call it risk assessment, but they're going to whip out tools. And maybe it's application penetration testing. We just had some consultants do a risk assessment of our traffic management system, the control system that does signal timing for the city, right? Because it turns out if there's ever an emergency response, earthquake, 2 inches of snow, whatever, in the EOC, 1 inch, in the EOC, the Emergency Operations Center where I work, I am ESF2, Emergency Support Function 2, Communications Support. Transportation is ESF1. They run the show. Why? Because no matter what, the road's got to be clear. You got to evacuate wounded. You got to put out fires. You got to get fuel in. You got to do all this stuff. Transportation management, the control systems that run that, extremely important. So we had some guys come and do risk assessment. You know, they whip out the tools and they're like penetration testing, finding, you know, that the username and the password for the admin, there was admin, and the firewalls were wide open and all. Okay.
Just an FYI, Mike, the Hawaii kids are living in an area with the worst traffic congestion in the 50 states. The H1 is awful. And we actually had a student that did some of the stuff that you're talking about around emergencies, trying to plan traffic patterns if there was ever a really big hit to Honolulu.
So if there was ever a snowstorm?
Yeah, if there's ever a snowstorm in Honolulu.
They're going to get a bigger problem if there's ever a snowstorm in Honolulu. That's clearly God is ticked.
That's right.
Okay. So penetration testing is something that I think everybody needs to know a little about. And I'll go through a few tools and familiarize you with some names here in a minute. So getting into the entrepreneur space, startup companies, or being a vendor, I mean, it's going and hitching your wagon to, you know, one of the companies that's trying to be everything to everybody, you know, a Symantec, a McAfee, an RSA, these guys. You know, if you have a good background in information security and you are reasonably well spoken, you know who makes more money than anyone in this whole ecosystem? The salespeople, right? And you don't even have to be a salespeople. You can be a sales engineer, somebody that just rides along with the salesperson and tells them to keep their mouth shut, and you will explain to the customer how your product will work for them, right? And they write up the sales paperwork, and they make a huge commission, and you do not. But you are well paid. Okay, and then finally, the bottom of the food chain, me. Next slide, please. Me who has no other technical skills. Okay, so there's a number of roles, okay? And so those roles map back to the things that you learn in these classes, and now we need to figure out how to add a little bit to that, because just education ain't gonna do it, right? You can have a really, really great educational resume, and that ain't gonna do it. So you gotta think about certifications. You are getting a really top shelf education here, but we're gonna add something to that. Education, certifications, self-education in stuff that colors outside the lines a little bit, right? The hack tools, things like that. And by the way, If you wanted to grab these tools and point them at the city of Seattle, knock yourself out. Okay, it's not like it's not going on. Our websites, no. It's, Kevin's making his creepy movie here. It's as good as in writing. It's,
He wants to get a jail card back.
well,
We learned from Barbara.
so it's, I mean, really, at the city, how many password guesses we get this week? Like 29,000 password guesses this week, right? We had 1,900 attacks against our websites. There have been weeks where our websites are attacked about every 2 minutes, right? So you're not going to do nothing to us. But if you find anything, give us a call. What?
I said if we find something, we get a treat.
If you find something, I'm buying you lunch.
Hopefully it's not at the county jail.
Yeah. You get
It's not too good there.
lunch and an orange
But that's why we
jumpsuit.
want it in writing.
It's on video.
Okay, all right. So now let's talk about the experience, because having a certification on your resume gets it through that HR system, right? Gets you an interview, right? When they get this in front of them, they're going to want to see what experience you have, right? What exposure to live fire have you had? So one way that I like a lot is internships, because you were an intern, you're an intern, you're going to be an intern, you're going to be an intern, okay? And this helps us out quite a bit. In return for that, we help you get transitioned into the job market, because up here in the Pacific Northwest in particular, we have a very well organized group of information security professionals who talk to each other all the time. And if you have groomed yourself for a particular role, that role is out there. Every time I do the Agora jobs dump, we find between 80 and 100 jobs within 50 miles of Seattle. There's a lot going on here. I mean, there's a whole menu of stuff. You could go to work for the Navy, you could go to work for the FBI, you could go to work for the Amazon, or for Costco, or for Nordstrom, or for Starbucks. All these guys have jobs all the time.
And let me add for you guys in Honolulu, Gerald is keeping track of jobs there too. You've got action with Paycom, with the FBI there. There's all kind of things going on the island, because you guys are targets. They have that huge tourism business there, Mike. It's just, the hotels just haven't in the past been really super about locking things down. So
Oh yeah, I know.
it's an interesting place.
Yeah, I like that FBI thing that came out that said, don't use the hotel networks because they were pushing malware on you. That was pretty interesting. Okay, so internships are good, especially if you can intern with an organization that's really going to hook you up. You're going to learn to use the technology, and you're going to learn what an incident looks like. You're going to find out that 99% of what we see that's weird is nothing. And it's that 1% you got to tease out of there. That's the analyst work. Right? Malware analysis, things like that. Right? It's not just sitting in front of watching computer screens and watching the networks. There's stuff to do. Ginger writes policy for me. Right? You're working on privacy policy for mobile devices right now. Okay, apprenticeships, that's another thing. This is, I think, primarily a military thing, and Barbara and I are conspiring actually to do something with this. But an apprenticeship is just like if you were going to learn to be, I don't know, a steel worker and you were an apprentice. But we can set up an apprentice program, information security, and especially if we can bring in the GI Bill and get these guys paid after they come back, from Iraq and Afghanistan, and put them through some kind of training program, that would solve a lot of problems. That would be a big community service, and we can use those folks as analysts because they're intelligence analysts, in their roles, and they have some IT experience. If your job in the military was to shoot mortars, that's probably not a fit, right? But some of these guys are a good fit, and so we're going to experiment with this. There's entry-level jobs too. Taking a job that's not the job you want because it gets you the experience, placeholder it for a while. It's true. In this business, you can change jobs every 6 months and keep doubling your salary. The unemployment rate in InfoSec is 0. There's a lot going on out there. So, if you're having trouble getting what you want, take something less. Okay, so which one of those roles is going to be for you? And it's not too early to think about. What what do I want to happen to me when I pop out of this thing at the end, right? How am I lining up? Am I getting the right experience, certifications, et cetera? If I'm not, how can I go get the experience that I need? You know, and typically when we take interns, we're taking, you know, somebody from community college in the area, and they are doing primarily technical work, malware analysis, incident response, you know, handling the technology. And the grad students that we're getting from University of Washington are doing policy work and helping me go to oversight meetings. And sometimes we just leave you guys in charge and leave. And no, we do, don't we? You're in charge. You're acting, exactly.
All right. You just close your door. Thank you very much, Mike.